Chris, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Listen, you are one of those coaches who I hear a lot about, and I know that, you're doing a really good job, but I, don't know much about you, as in like, what's your philosophy, like what's your, coaching style and so on and so forth. So that's why I really wanted to reach out and really talk to you about all of these things. So
Yeah.
thanks for coming.
Oh no, it should be fun. It's my first podcast, so.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
No, I enjoy doing these. I've done just a few, not too many, but I listen to many, and like it's fun. Like it's nice to get to know people, especially from your own province, from your own city, and like really good professionals. So why don't we start from the beginning? And can you please tell us, how did you get into coaching?
Into coaching? Okay, so I played competitive tennis, a good chunk of my life. I started late, got injured, kind of stopped playing tennis around, like competitively around university, basically. And then I used to coach, like part-time here and there on the weekends, like most of us start. And my old coach, Casey Curtis, who coached Milos Raonic, had asked me for years, like, "Hey, Chris, like, do you want to coach?" And I wanted to get into marketing, and I had a marketing degree, and so on and so forth. And one day I was full-time job in a marketing agency, and I was still coaching on the weekends for like whatever reason. I was like, why am I like, obviously like there's something here. Like I'm busting my butt every day, and yet I'm still coaching on the weekend. Um, and so I reached out. So at the time, the company I was at, it was like fun, but it wasn't kind of what I wanted to do, I guess, or wasn't where I was at. And I reached out to, Casey, my old coach, and who became basically my mentor. And I said, "Hey, you're looking for a coach." And it just so happened that his assistant got a head pro job at Headwaters, Miran. And so
Mm.
like basically like a month, like when I could start, he was starting his new job. And this is, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago now. And it kind of like worked out like very like serendipitously. So then I started with him. Like I'd worked with like decent players before, but then I kind of jumped right into his high performance program at Mayfair Parkway, and then um, kind of the rest of that was history. I worked with him for 3, 4 years, something like that. I don't get the dates right. COVID
Hmm.
messes it all up.
Yeah.
And then I moved to Blackmore. We worked there for a couple of years, and then I got offered a position to basically run or direct the high performance for Tennis Clubs of Canada. So we have, now it's like 7 clubs that I'm responsible for 2 and 3, like in the general area. Blackmore Tennis Club in Richmond Hill, MRTC in Aurora, and Newmarket Tennis Club in Newmarket. Obviously, I don't spend a ton of time with Newmarket, but mostly those 2 clubs. But I'm mostly situated in Blackmore, where we have like our national high performance program with kind of like the best players from all the clubs, more or less. I kind of
Yeah,
come
we'll
for that
we'll
one.
get it. We'll get into that a little bit later. Talk about your program, of course. But like when things like this happen, what you described, it's meant to be. Like things like Miran getting a position, like you're all of a sudden like passionate about coaching, and it's just like things are like boom, and it's like that's how it's for you. So listen, what's it like working with Casey? That was one of my questions. I wanted to save it for later, but since you brought him
Oh,
up,
it's honestly it's like the best thing that happened to my coaching career. I mean, also as a player as well. I think
mhm.
the way that he understands and looks at the game is I haven't seen it with many coaches. Now, like
Mm.
I mean he focuses a lot on like technique. I mean he has all the other stuff down, but he's really specific about how you hit a shot. And
Mhm.
what I learned a lot from him is like how you simplify something. Like if a kid is not getting enough spin on the ball, you and I or an average coach might say, I'm not saying you or I are average, but might say, well, you need to brush. And then he'll say something that's like innocuous and almost random. It's like, think about touching the racket up to the sky, or like, imagine that you're throwing a toaster into like something like that. You can
Mhm.
really kind of like you can mentally capture,
Yeah.
especially as a young athlete, and
Yeah.
mimic that exact movement instead of thinking of it like a tennis swing. You think of it as like a
Mhm.
very simple movement. And he was able to find like what your problem was very quickly, or what a player's problem is very quickly, and then fix it in like 10 words. Like find the
Mm.
10 words that are going to make you do the motion without you even realizing it. And I think
Yeah.
that his ability to keep it really simple, I was always kind of paying attention to what he was saying, because he had a really good eye for what's happening in a swing. So I think
Mm,
that working with him in that respect, you could always like learn a lot because I was always surprised at how quickly he could fix someone's problem in
yeah.
like very little words, and how quickly, if they're missing their serve wide too much, it'd be like, oh, it's because the wrist isn't in the right position, right?
Mm,
Versus like, and he kind of know like specifically about that. So that was kind of one, let's say from a technical standpoint. The other one is it's he's demanding, right? He was demanding as a coach when I was under him as a coach, and he's demanding of his players and his staff as well. Like he doesn't take any BS, and he kind of expects you
can
to,
you elaborate a little bit on demanding, like with players specifically?
yeah, he
Like
holds you,
I understand what demanding is, but like just in
yeah,
his,
in his
yep,
way, it's
yeah.
he holds you accountable. Like he works really hard and expects you to do the same. Like, demanding is in like you need to put in like the proper time investment. If you are learning a stroke, you need to shadow swing for half an hour. You need to skip rope for 20 minutes a day. You need to, play a practice match. You need to drill a certain shot that you're supposed to do. As an example, I'll give you an example from my own experience. I was working on a backhand volley in a private lesson.
Mm.
And, one day, I come to the lesson, and within two shots, he's like, Chris, did you practice? And I was like, no, I didn't. And so then for the rest of that practice, I was shadowing backhand volleys in the corner. Like that was it. Like that was my practice. Just,
Yeah.
but it was fair. Like at the end of the day, like it was fair. And I think everything that he did was tough, but it was fair. And I think that's probably the best way. But again, he cares about his students, and he expects you to care just as much about your own game. And the funny thing is, I don't know anyone who cares more. So then he
Mm.
cares almost more than most players do about their own game. And I think then that leads to like the demands that you'd see a top athlete put on themselves, like a professional athlete. He
Yeah.
emulates that in the way that he coaches, and then he expects the same out of a 12-year-old player, as an example. Obviously, he doesn't treat a 12-year-old like a 16-year-old, but he kind of expects that level from everyone. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Like I think that's what best coaches do in general. Like you mentioned, that him being able to know the player in front of him, and also finding the right words, to trigger the change, and in the least possible amount of words. And I think that's what best coaches do. Like they can look at a player for like 5 minutes, for like 2 minutes, and say, like something like crazy as toaster, but for a kid it's like, oh my god, it's so cool, like it makes so much sense. It For adults it might be so like, what are you saying? Like, but for kids, like with their imagination, it just like clicks right away.
Yeah.
So it makes perfect sense. And what you mentioned about standards, and like I've heard many stories about Casey. I haven't worked with him, like I didn't get a chance, but we would talk sometimes during tournaments, and I would hear stories. And what I really personally respect about him is that he sticks to his values no matter what. Like he has his ways, he has his understanding, his view about the game, and he's just gonna defend them no matter what, no matter at what cost. And that's something you don't see a lot these days. Whether it's with federations, whether it's with personal coaches, and just like he really will defend his point of view and his way. And if you're not happy about it, that's okay. We're not meant to be together. Like you can you can find your another coach pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. You kind
So
of,
yeah. So what was your, like, let's make a little bit of a segue. Like, what was your biggest learning for you as a coach personally, working with Casey? It's hard to just name one, because again, like working with the mentor like this,
yeah.
it's a lot of learning every day. But like something that sticks out to you the most.
The most, it's dedication to your player.
Mm,
I think that the most, I mean, you look at success in anything. If you are passionate about what you do, it's, I would say it's general passion for what you're doing. And I don't know if you can learn that from someone. I think I must have. Like, I don't think we're all just, oh, I'm born into coaching. Like, I don't think that. But I think seeing
mm,
someone as passionate as him with coaching, and then he transfers that to his actual players. Like he is so excited, like every day, to make a player better, and you
mm,
can feel it, and you can see it, and you can see the results. Um, And I think I learned that if I want to make my players successful, that needs to be a passion of mine, that I need to make sure that I'm doing everything I can to make them better and push them as much as I can. I think some coaches, not all, can get into this. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday with Al's podcast, The Gray Zone, and he was talking about
Yeah, me too.
some coach that counted the amount of balls he'd need to feed to make money or something as like an example. Like, I mean, that's a very broad example, right? But I mean,
Yes.
but it's like, kind of, I figured it out because he would say this a lot. You need to be providing value all the time.
Mm.
Are we making sure that let's say you're doing a private lesson, which we tend to do, all coaches tend to do that really well. If you're in a private lesson, 60 minutes, you're on the whole time. But when we were doing even clinics, it was like, are we making our kids better every single minute? No, that doesn't
And
always
every
mean,
single kid,
yeah,
right?
exactly. And that doesn't always mean that we're talking the whole time. That might mean we only need to say one thing in the hour. As an example, like especially with a higher level player, they only might need one instruction. It's not
Yeah.
about just da 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 da, but it's, are we ensuring that every minute they're on court is the most productive they can be in? And I think he uses the word productive a lot, and I think about that all the time. Am I being as productive as I can be at all times? And then that segues into the other things I think I spoke about as well. Are you shadowing at home? Are you practicing your swings properly? Are you watching tennis? Are you sleeping enough? Like, are you doing everything that you can to be very productive? And I think he does that as a coach. And then I
Yeah.
now have learned that as a player, and I learned that as a coach, and I pass that on to my students as best I can. It's about being productive, I would say.
Yeah, I think you're touching on a very important point of providing value to the player, and it has to go beyond just like you're saying, private lesson, beyond group training. Like, what can we do more to help our players get better, to help our players get more passionate about the game? And I personally realized that when I was working at the regional center here in Toronto, where like Andre Labelle, my mentor at that time, like he would schedule some other activities, finding ways how to make things more fun for the kids. Not necessarily like when we talk about, getting them better, it's not necessarily like feeding more balls, right? Like, can we make their overall tennis experience more fun? Okay, so can we make it, more interesting, more passionate? So things like this are huge, and I'm happy that like you're bringing that up as well. Let's say a kid comes to your academy, okay, and he will work with Chris Manzinali as his coach. What a kid, like, like regardless of the age, it doesn't matter. What a kid will get in terms of, like philosophy from Coach Chris. Like, what is he gonna expect or should expect?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first off, I would say is to be technically sound and solid. Like, I'm a big believer in there's kind of the best way. Now, I'm not by any stretch saying that my way is the best way, but I believe there is a best way. And
Mm,
your stroke is going to look generally the way that I want it to look.
mm,
And because I believe that that is the best way to hit a forehand or a backhand. So they're going to have a very clear idea. They're going to look at myself, the way that I hit, the way that most of my players hit, and in
mm,
up to you, but in 4 to 6 months, you're going to have that forehand, that backhand, that volley, that serve. Now, every one of my players I teach them basically the same thing, and there's a lot of nuance in the way that they hit the ball, the way they follow through. But I think I've heard from other people as well, like you can tell who I've coached. It's kind of like Richmond Hill Country Club. You can kind of tell,
yeah,
like you look at a kid and you're like, oh, they go to Richmond Hill,
it's
right?
like a brand, right?
It's yeah, sort of, and at least that way, the kid knows what to expect coming in, and they have the best players, let's say in my group, that they can look up to, or they
Yeah.
may even be really good. They may even be great, but they may be better than the players around them, but they don't like their forehand or backhand, or it's not clean. So
Hmm.
you're going to have a very kind of specific game that's going to look, in my opinion, close to perfect, the way that I think it works the best anatomically. For
Hmm.
better or worse. I know some coaches kind of are more fluid with it. I look at it like, you watch the top sprinters in the world, they all look generally almost the same. Like you can copy out Usain Bolt and all these people, and they look pretty similar, right? Now, maybe we don't understand the nuance of different arm positions, but I find that they're very similar. I find tennis, there's like a lot of variance. And some coaches will say that, and I'm not saying I'm right, but some coaches will say like, well, that's like individual personal preference. But I'm like, then why doesn't like Michael Phelps have a different, breaststroke than the guy in second? Like, because they look pretty similar. So that's kind of, this is the way that the forehead's going to be, and it's going to look like that. So it's maybe a bit strict or
Yeah.
demanding, but that's the way it is.
Okay, so like first you would make sure that their technical competencies are there. But in terms of your values, like what is it something that you would pass on to that kid, and you are passing right now to all your
Yeah, so I mean, in that
players?
respect, I mean, it's as a general, it's honestly, it's being passionate about something. It's being excellent for the sake of being excellent, not for a specific goal. I think, I'm still as a coach and even I don't know an athlete anymore, but I'm still trying to like always be better just for the sake of it's fun to just suck at something and be better at it. And I want
Yeah,
the players to understand that you should always be improving and you should always be tweaking and looking for kind of reflecting on yourself and seeing how can I be better. And that
yeah,
could be in your technique, it could be in your footwork, it could be with your time management, it could be in the way that you think about matches, it could be in school, it could be in your extracurriculars you do, but it's kind of you need to put everything what if you're going to choose to do something, you better do it 100% or as close to
yeah,
100% as you can given the time that, kids face, school and friends and I'm not saying their whole life needs to be tennis, but if you separate 20 hours a week for tennis, then you need to use all those 20 hours to be as good as you can. And hopefully they pass that into the other things they do in life as well. School, their jobs down the road, volunteering, whatever it is. So it's
yeah. No, 100%. It's having a leader or a mentor, like in your case with Casey, in my case with other and everybody has had a mentor at some point. Like our players have us now. I think it's important that we show with our example. Like what is it that is basically you should be striving to do. Like, okay, Chris is passionate about tennis, passionate about everything that he's tries to do, and he wants to get better in everything that he starts. And I think that vibe in like just unquestionably passes to all your players, that and that's why they stick to you, right? Because they find value being around you as a human being. It's not about at some point it's becomes more than just about forehands and backhands. 100%, like 100%.
yeah.
I could say it has to be.
Yeah,
So
the
like I
thing you
think it's
said, sorry, the thing you said, setting an
no, go
example.
ahead.
Yeah, I think that you touched on it. It's like set an example. And I think the best coaches in the world or Canada, they practice what they preach.
Yeah,
And they may not run and hit a forehand like their student, right? Like, if they're 55 years old or 60 years old, they're not going to hit like their 20-year-old student, but you can tell that if they could, they would, right? Like if they were 20 years old, they'd do it. And like kind of leading by example, I think, especially with young athletes, I mean, all we do when we learn is imitate, right? Like from the time we're babies.
yeah,
And I think if we show them that we really care and that we're passionate and that we work hard, they do. I have like a quick story. I can try to sum it up quickly, but it's like a great
for
example
sure.
of this. I started with a kid, a total beginner, in last year in like May or April. Laziest kid you've ever seen in your life. Like, and again,
Shout out to that laziest kid who's watching this, by the way.
yes, I actually had told him this story was because I was very blunt after the fact, but he's talking to me. The dad asked me for help, and I wasn't giving him privates. He was just in the group because one of the things is like if you're not like a hard worker, you can be in some of my programs and I'm going to help you, but I'm not going to go above and beyond. Right? I've got you have to I'm not going to push you and wake you up early in the morning like but you got to give these kids a chance, right? And you kind of have to balance your time out. So, anyways, I get this kid, laziest kid you ever see in your life, and I looked at this kid and I was like, in my head, I'm like, there's no way this kid's going to make it. Like, there's no way. But I'm going to do my best. I'm going to treat him like every other kid. And over the course of a summer, he literally, I've very rarely seen it. He changed completely. He went from one of the laziest, arrogant, self-centered kind of kids to this like really thoughtful and like really disciplined and in the matter of 4 months. And it was wild. but I spoke to his parents, and they said I put the time in. I challenged him. I held him to a higher standard, and
Yeah,
and I think that, and he saw that how passionate I was and how hard that I wanted to work, and the kids around me. It's not just me, and like the kids and the coaches around me. And then he's like, "Whoa, I can do it too." And I think
yeah,
that we have a huge opportunity as coaches to change kids. I think more than we do, and that was a cool learning experience for me.
100%,
That a kid
100%.
could just change, and kudos to him because it's not. We can do a lot, but if the kid doesn't want to change, they're not going to change.
Yeah, I
Um,
think some of the kids just don't know how you
yeah,
can do things. Like how what hard work is. They're not lazy. Some of them are, but some kids just like maybe that kid that you just mentioned. Perhaps I don't know, but maybe he just didn't know like his possibilities. Nobody showed him like, hey, this is hard work can be fun and rewarding. Hard work is not just like you're being miserable on the court. With that's what I see some parents do. Like you go to tournaments and like unfortunately like not so much in Canada, more like when you start going to States and to Europe, in Canada sometimes as well, unfortunately, but that's what you see. Like they turn tennis and hard work into something really miserable, which is like that's how you lose a player. But that's definitely that's a great story actually. It's because in my experience I've seen only two times when a player went completely like changed from being like that laziest kid,
yeah,
and just like not knowing what their goals are to being one of the top players in Canada, and in the span of like 3-4 years. And I was like, wow, that's like wow. And sometimes you just don't know what made the change, because they were always in the same environment, and one day they just decide, what, I'm just gonna do this. And that's great that we can do that. We have a lot of power, as coaches, like what you mentioned, that the influence that the kids have, like is just unbelievable. Like the things that kids sometimes tell me, and I'm sure with you as well, I'm like, really? I said that, and you did that? What? Like, so, like things that they remember. Like I already forgot. I didn't even pay attention that was so significant. But
yes,
for them,
yeah,
that was so like, I don't want to say life changing, but that was like so memorable, or so you know defining. It's like I was like, unbelievable. So we have to really watch out what we're
yeah,
saying, and and really make sure that we like show up every day. Like they see, like kids have this unique ability, I find, to sense whether the person is honest, whether the person is trustworthy, whether the person is hardworking, whether they're faking it. They know it. Kids know it. Everything, they feel it. They might not be able to express it with words, but they freaking know, man. They're smart. So it's
yeah.
like
No, that's totally true.
um
You see
yeah.
with top coach, I think one of the reasons the really top coaches do so well, for better or worse, they're like either they're totally deserving, or they're some combination of deserving and arrogant, but they believe that they are like God's gift to tennis, like the really kind of like the really successful coaches. And because they believe that whatever they're saying is like, coming from like the tennis gods, and that what they say is right, the kids believe it too, right? Because they can, like you said, they
Yes.
can sense that
Yeah.
that coach is right, or like that they believe they're right more than anything else. And I think often, like you said, we do have some influence. There are good versions of this coach and bad versions of this coach. The problem is the parents and the players don't always know. But sometimes you can have, I'm exaggerating, the worst coach in the world who is the most confident, and the kid will listen to
100%.
everything they say because they
Yeah.
come out with like you said, like they can see that you believe it. And it's not even that you're right. It's like, do you believe it? Then they're going to believe it too.
Yeah,
Um,
I'll tell you a quick story. It's I don't know if it's embarrassing to admit, but I'll admit it. Some people know this story, but during my Coach 3 certification, I was doing my final video evaluation, and like you have a bunch of kids, you have to do a topic, you have 15 minutes, and then your course facilitator decides if it was good or not. They talk to the kids as well. So I did my thing, 15 minutes, and my course facilitator talked to the kids. They told him the feedback, and he brought me in and he said, "Listen, here's the thing: the kids did not improve, but they thought they did." you know, so it's like so it's like the feeling of, like them getting better because of maybe I was like, passionate, or like, I did a bunch of like, articulations, and I'm like, no, you have to do, yes, that's the one, and that made them, they didn't improve, in
Yeah.
15 minutes, but that made them feel like they did. And I found it like very interesting, because it's like, if they didn't improve now, would they potentially, would that keep them motivated enough and then work harder like the next session, and maybe eventually they will? I'm not saying that's the strategy here, but that's just shows you the power of belief, I guess. I
Yeah,
don't
for
know.
sure. And I would bet they got better afterwards, even if they didn't after 50 minutes. Like you said, I imagine if they're motivated, they would do it, right? If they thought more balls were going in, they're going to get more balls in. I
Yeah,
mean, that's just
yeah,
confidence. So
it's
you instilled
it's it,
confidence in them, right? Like,
yeah, that's interesting. I still have that story in the back of my mind, and I'm like, oh my god, like, so next time I go on court, they better freaking improve. So that's like became my biggest like insecurity in a way. Like every time I'm on court, and that's something you brought up as well. Like they have to improve. They have to make sure that we're bringing some value to them. So you mentioned that you're obviously passionate about the sport. You watch tennis. I'm assuming you are. Like,
not as much as
how
I
often?
used to. I think
No.
I
Okay.
watched like let's say tour tennis, like matches.
Mm.
Not as much as I used to, just because I watch it. If I watch any more tennis, my fiance will kill me, because I'm on court most of the time.
Eh,
But I
yeah.
will say I've been better at watching tennis with a purpose, which I wish the kids would
Mm.
do more of. Like if I
Yeah.
watch a match, and I tend not to watch, I try not to watch highlights. And I try to watch, like matches, let's say like a match on YouTube, like I was watching Alcaraz versus Casper Ruud, like the US Open, way after
Yeah.
the fact. But kind of watching for like watching their feet or the way they hit or like where they're placing the ball. Like I've tended to watch way less tennis, but pay more attention to the times that I do, if that
Yeah.
kind of
That's
answers.
interesting. Yes. No, no, 100%. It's so when you isolate it, it really becomes your focus, and that's when you pick up a lot of things. I guess like, oh, that's what they do really well, or that's like helps you, I guess, like to bring more value to your players back in the program after you isolate like this.
Yeah, and then and often I'll almost always can I make one of my players better? Like I'll watch a
Mm-hmm.
match going on, I'll watch Alcaraz playing, and not that necessarily a student of mine plays like Alcaraz, but I'll be like, oh, that's so interesting. Like that, the way that he constructed that point, I wonder if he does that
Mm-hmm.
again. Oh, he did it again and again and again. I
So you see the
wonder,
pattern.
and then I can then kind of take clips of that video, and then I'll come to practice the next day, or whenever the lesson, at the time where I think that's great for the player. Like if we're working on serve and volley as an example, and I think Alcaraz is great defending, I'm not going to bring that up tomorrow, but I'll have that in the
Mm-hmm.
back of my mind. So the next time, often we have to convince players, right? Like,
Yeah.
don't
Yeah.
hit to the
You have to
line, right?
sell.
And you have to yeah, you have to sell it. So I'm like, man, you're hitting too close to lines, and a week goes by, and I'm watching this kid do it, and I remember that video or the match I watched with Alcaraz or whatever, and I'll see like, man, look how many balls this guy hits in the center area of
Yeah.
the court, and then I'll show it to the kid. So most of my watching, honestly, is how can I use what I've been watching to help a player, to give them an example,
Mm-hmm.
to sell them an idea that they should believe in more than you know
Mm-hmm.
what they already do, I guess.
Do you think it's our fault as coaches when the kids go close to the line, because we always tell them like you have to move your opponent, you have to like hit outside of the middle, like is it our wording that makes it kind of tricky, or it's just like that's just the way of learning?
No, I don't think so. I think I
Mm.
have kind of a theory about this, and I think that uh, higher level players and coaches will, I think, will understand more. Like the better you get, the more you like hitting the ball. Like
Mm-hmm.
you actually like long rallies. Like most players like long rallies. Like most good players, like they don't mind
Mm-hmm.
playing long rallies.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because you like hitting the ball, because you know that your ball can go in 100 times in a row. Like if you're in neutral, you just love that feeling, especially if your opponent can't punish you. You just
Yeah.
I love hitting. Like I love the ball hitting my strings, and I almost am excited when the ball comes back. And I think most kids don't want the ball to come back, so they're always looking like, how can I end the point as quickly as possible? I think part of it is
Is
like,
it because they know they cannot? Sorry to interrupt. Is it
no,
because
no,
they know you think they cannot stay longer enough in the rally? Is
yes,
it like the
I believe that
for the
100%.
for the
Like they don't,
juniors? Okay.
yeah, they don't believe they have the skill to put 20 balls in a court, so they aim closer to lines. But then it's like a vicious cycle because they never practice putting 20 balls in the court, so they're always having to hit close to lines because the only like positive results they get are when they do hit the ball close to line. Because if they try to hit, if they know it takes 10 shots to win a rally, but they can't hit 10 shots, they're going to lose every point. But if they can
Yeah.
40% of the time hit a ball as hard as they can into the corner, at least they've won 40% of the points. I think
Makes
that's,
sense.
and I think, I mean, I'll segues. The one thing I thought actually about talking about this podcast, which I think segues into this, I think a big part of it is the players. I think one of the biggest problems I think in tennis in general is we're always looking to play with better players. And I've been talking a lot with my players about this, and and you hear from parents a lot. You hear from players like, "Oh, why can't I hit with this person? Can I hit with better players?"
Yeah,
And my answer lately is like, "Who does Alcaraz play with? Like, who does Djokovic play with? Is there some
it's true.
three gods of tennis that we've never heard about that they train with? Now, what
They
do they
come
do?
down, to play
Yeah,
with Alcaraz.
exactly, right? So how and they're getting better, right? Like these guys at the
Yeah,
top can get better, and often the gap extends more than it was last year or 2 years before. So how are they getting better
yeah,
as the best player, let's say in their group? And I think that when you are, and I use the term redlining, if you're playing someone that's your level or a bit above you, you're always like redlining. You're always like your engine's about to explode, so you can't sit there and beat someone going through a player. Like I had a player yesterday who won a set, practice set 6 love. And then I said to him, I said, okay, now what you're going to do is you're going to hit every ball to this guy's forehand, and you're going to hit as heavy as you can, and you're going to try to make him miss, not with with placement, but with ball quality. Now he's not going to miss on the first, second, third, or fourth ball. He's going to miss on the eighth ball because he can't handle your ball quality. And the first time he plays this guy, he ends up losing. But over time, he's going to be able to beat, let's say, that player because the skill gap is so big that
yeah,
he'll eventually be able to win. Like I mean, I've seen you play. If you and I play, I think we're similar enough. If I serve and volley against you, I don't serve and volley at all. I'll never beat you. I don't care how much I serve and volley. I'll serve and volley for 10 years. I'll never beat you serve and volley, as an example. But if I play my student serve and volleying, you know, maybe they beat me 6-4, then they beat me 7-5, then it's 6-5 me, and then or 7-5 me, and then I'm able to kind
yeah.
of to gain a benefit. And I think a lot of players are so fixated on becoming being better than the people around them for the sake of being better than them, but not like I want to develop my skills to be better than they currently are.
Yeah, this is really big. I find, I always promote to parents, and you're on the same page here. Like, it's, I always give this example. Like you go, my kid wants to play with the best kids. Yeah, like my kid is too good. Like, you go to tournaments. Okay, who are you gonna face first round? Okay, you're gonna face somebody. Depending on the level, you're gonna face somebody, maybe first, maybe second, who's weaker than you, and you have to know how to beat players weaker than you. How do you know how to beat players weaker than you? Well, you train against players weaker than you. You put in the same amount of work that you would put against players who are good, because when players are good, you're working, you're focused, like, because, well, the situation forces you to be focused, and the situation forces you to be, like, reactive and very, like, intense. But when the player is weaker, oh, he's missing, so your intensity lowers all of a sudden. But when match comes, and the player doesn't give you any pace, and you have to finish all the points, and your focus is not there, and you shank couple first balls, you start get tight. So where is that? Like, you because you didn't practice that in your home club playing against weaker players, So I find it's very important that, like, you talk about it, and, like, other coaches will continue promoting it, because the understanding that you only get better when you play against better people is so false. We really have to, spread the word, so to say, because it's it's total opposite. because like I think there's a limitation if you only play with one level, like only people better than you. So you're gonna jump academies after, like, it just doesn't make, it doesn't hold. That statement just doesn't hold. Um, and I'm glad you brought it up. My question to you, unless you wanted to add something on
Well,
this.
I like one of the last things I think you said, like when they jump academies, let's say. And I think this
Mm,
is where some of the most gains can be made. Like a lot of players don't like being the best player in their academy or the best
mm,
player in their group. And I can speak from my personal experience, not that I was the best player, but I trained with Milos Raonic for
mm,
5 years. He
mm,
was the best player in that group by a large margin for the entire time I was there.
mm.
At one point, I was probably the third best player in that group, and it was still like 6-2 for Milos every single time. And but again, he was able to, like when he played me, Casey would set up practice matches, and I mean, I was happy as I could be getting to play with Milos, but he would only have one serve. He'd have to hit his second serve as his first serve. He'd have to serve and volley. He wouldn't be allowed to hit winners. Like he would work on certain skill sets that he wouldn't be able to do outside of the group. And what he would do is he would spend 80% of his time basically developing skills against players weaker, and then
Yeah,
outside of group, he would then play practice matches with great players, with like top
yeah,
players. Like at the time, he would play with I mean, tennis people would know them, like older guys like Ben Wu, Rob Horwood, Tyler Prescott.
yeah,
He'd play Chris Gostick. Like, Chris Gostick came back from University of Alabama. I think he played number one, and he would play practice matches against Milos outside of group. But I think a lot of players, and I've seen it in my own coaching career and in other groups, like they were like middle of the road. They become the best player, and in 3 months they're out.
yeah,
And I think they jump groups, and it's like it's amazing. And if I look at, and I think I challenge coaches, players, and parents, when you look at the best players, in the groups that you want to go to tomorrow, what's that best player doing? Like you go there because you know I'm gonna use pro names just so I don't single out certain kids, but like I want to go to you know Veneto because Milos Raonic plays there, right? Well, it's like, well, where's he playing? Like, doesn't he need to go somewhere else? Like, he's the best player at that club for like a reason, and he sits there, and a lot of the best players at clubs, the very best, are there the whole time.
yeah,
And then there is a kid that could be one of the best players in the province or Canada. They go up in any group, whether it's mine or yours, and they finally make it to the top of that group, and they immediately go somewhere else.
they're out.
And
Yeah,
then they're back to being like the middle of the pack, and like, but again, they're not learning the appropriate skills. They're back to redlining, and like you said, they're not learning to beat people like worse than them.
yeah. I think it's, to me, this whole thing, just to add one more thing to this conversation, it's, when the parents are asking, well, who's in your group? My child is the best in your group, and I say, I'm here. Like, weren't I the reason? Wasn't I the reason? Like, you guys came in the first place, and I got him to this level. So wouldn't it make sense for you guys to stay with the coach that made you better? And same thing with you. Like when it doesn't matter who's the coach, but your kid is improving. You see him improve with the coach, and now you're saying, because of, so basically that action tells me that the only reason the kid improved is because of the players he played. So my contribution was like not relevant at all.
Yeah, point
So
them to Emma Raducanu. That's my favorite example, right? Like, you
yes,
know, you go from 200 in the world to, and now this is an isolated example, but I think it's very telling. You go from 200 in the world,
yeah,
you win a slam, and then you switch coaches. And in an interview that I read, her thing was, well, I had a coach that got me to win a Grand Slam, but now I need a coach that has experience with Grand Slam champions. And look, I'm not a pro player. I never won a Grand Slam. So here it is. It's easy to criticize someone at that level. But like to me, that was one of the weirdest things I've ever seen. And yes, I remember because it proves my point, but like, she's still successful, but like I don't think it's where we thought she would be right after she won the
yeah.
US Open. And it's like, well, I made it. Like, why not stick with that coach that got you there?
It's very weird. I think it's, but you see it happening like, it's very common in tennis. And I think, speaking of Tyler Prescott, he was the one who said it. Like, it's the weird sport that we have because it's the only sport where you win and you get fired. as a coach. Like
Yeah.
it's like you get to a certain level, and then the player decides you're not good enough. I need somebody better to bring. Like it's like why,
Yeah.
and then you have some examples like Tony Nadal, and you have numerous examples, like Serena Williams' father and Venus Williams' father, and like Wozniacki, and like anyway, so you have like so many examples where like a coach was like it's a long time coach and they do great and they keep improving and it's all good. So I guess it's about mindset. Everything is about mindset, like what
Yeah.
we talked about pretty
That's a
much
great
today.
quote. I mean, you wouldn't see that in the NBA.
Yeah,
They're,
no, it's you
they
get
win
you
the
get like
championship.
5 year extension, like more money, like more like
Yeah.
what else do you want? It's like new players. What do you want? It's like, but here it's like you're not good enough.
Yeah,
It's like
that's a funny.
what? It doesn't make sense. Uh, let's talk a little bit about uh, technical work, okay? Because you brought up that the like the vast majority of the time, can correct me if I understood it correct, you would spend on technical development, especially with a newer player.
Yeah. Yeah, no. So
Okay.
it's mostly like in private lessons, it's like a huge portion of like what I do is almost
Mm,
all technical.
mm,
Um, we might work on some patterns, but I don't really drill a pattern.
mm.
I'll drill it so that they understand it, so they can do it later.
Okay.
And then I'll do it like in our practices, like our group practices, but like in a private lesson, and I've seen different balances of it, and not that I never drill, but 90% of the time I'm working on developing a technical skill,
Mm.
something, a position of the arm or how to move or whatever. And that's most of, let's say, the privates, which I don't know if it's more or less, that's just how I learned. I think worked for me, versus like, hit three here and then one there, or hit three there and
Mm.
then one there. Like I spend, at least in private, I spend a ton of time just on how you shape
Yeah,
your arms.
that makes sense. So I have a question from the Instagram. I posted some story yesterday, like for people to ask question, and one of the questions was about technique. So I'm just gonna read it out. How many hours a week of tennis technique, private lessons, 10 years old should do? That's just direct quote.
So sorry, just to get it, because you cut out for a second. Is how many private, essentially this is a question, how many private lessons a week should you take if you're 10?
Not quite. So I'm guessing. So how
Okay.
many hours a week of tennis technique? Like how many hours a week you should work on technique? I guess in private lessons. That's maybe
Oh,
my
at 10
take on
years
it.
old, like all of it.
Yeah.
Like in my opinion, like 90% of your focus should be on, I ask my players, especially, I mean, when they're 15, 16, it changes, or 14, 15, and if they have a tournament
Mm,
coming up, it's a bit different. But let's assume, and sometimes even if they have a tournament, I don't, like you have to develop them anyway. But at 10 years old, like 90% of that time should be spent. I always ask a player, what are you thinking about? And the
mm,
answer should be, oh, that thing we did in the lesson where my elbow was supposed to be here, or about rotating my hips or keeping my head still or whatever. Like to me, it's like basically every time you're hitting a ball, you should be thinking about the technique, especially when you're
mm.
young, because you want to develop good habits like
Yeah.
properly. Now at 10, it's in my opinion, it's way more than that. Um, so maybe 90 is a lot, like yeah, 80 or 90%. And then it depends. Like, I mean, then I'll see a kid focusing a lot on their technique, and then I'll say, hey man, like just play some points now. I think you've got it. But I think
Mm,
that's up to the like this person, let's say this player should understand, like they should be thinking about technique the entire time and trust that the coach will see, okay, it's a little too much now. Like you're a little too in your own head. Just hit some
yeah.
balls. I think you've got it
Yeah.
down, but I think it's most of the time. You really
Okay.
shouldn't be playing um, without being mindful of exactly what your body's doing at all
Mm,
times until a coach or someone who knows more than you tells you, okay, just hit, like be yourself and don't worry.
okay. How many hours of privates for a 10-year-old?
Um,
Just in case I didn't understand
yeah,
that
yeah.
question, so I'm just gonna add one more.
I think it really depends on your goals. It depends. I mean, it's a lot of things. It's what can you financially afford? I'll say it in
Let's say you can afford, and let's say you want to be the best in Canada.
you should have every day. You should have a private lesson, in my opinion. I look at the best players that I saw, like when I was growing up.
Yeah.
I didn't know a lot, but I heard about them. Peter Polansky. With Dean, it was every day.
Yeah.
Casey and Milos was 1, if not 2 hours a day, every day. You look at someone like Nadal, I would imagine, I don't know, I would imagine that's a private lesson with Tony every day.
Oh,
Like,
hell yeah.
right?
Hell
Like,
yeah.
Felix with his dad. Like, so I would say if money is not an issue and time is not an issue, you should have a private every day. I think there's no
Mm.
substitute for direct kind of, if you want to be a pro, I really don't think there's a way to do it without that.
Yeah.
Just from what I've, not that I've coached a pro, maybe one day, but I think it's every day, or well, I mean with a rest day, 5, 6 days a week.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I had a lot of also, like, like those Instagram trolls. I have a lot of questions about, like, how did you get some handsome, like how do you keep your hair? Like, so, like, I don't get hair questions, like on my Instagram, but like things like this, like people asking like when is the wedding, things like this. So I'm kind of like avoiding those,
That's funny.
but
Thanks
I'm
for the ego
yeah,
boost
it's
though.
yeah, of course, So listen, let's just one more thing I wanted to talk about, because you mentioned something about kids' ability to stay in the point, and really grinding and being like loving the feeling of hitting the ball. And so what's your take then on, because if you look at the pro, and this is like my personal debate as well, like I'm always like internally like debating what's good, what's right, what's wrong type of thing. Like we want our players to be consistent. We want them to grind and to be able to you put a lot of balls in the court, especially when they're young. But as they're getting older, more physical, the length of rally, like the closer they are to the pro, the length of rally is getting like shorter and like shorter, like. So what's your take on practicing, your like 1-2 punch, being aggressive, versus like practicing building the point and staying in the rally?
Okay, yeah.
So
So I've
where do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
where
no,
is
I
this?
because I thought
Yep.
about this too. So I've actually been thinking about this a lot. So
Mm.
I'll answer that with, like, let's say, and I don't have the stat, but I had asked someone who deals with a statistician, and they say the average rally is what, like 3 or 4 shots. And I said,
Yep.
and I asked the guy because he posted something about, I forgot the guy. It was like a statistician for the ATP. Um, and I said, what's the stat on 30, 40 and deuce? I was like, and I said, my guess is it's double. And
Mm.
again, this is anecdotal, and I would love. So if anyone listening can figure out the stat, what is the average rally length at 30, 40, deuce, and ad?
You should
From
you should send an email to Craig O'Shaughnessy. I'm pretty sure he
Yeah,
has all the
that's
stats.
not a bad idea. So
It's like he'll
yeah,
have it.
I'll do that actually because it'll help me hopefully prove my point, or I'll know I'm wrong.
Yeah.
So I think that where do we lose matches, right? Like Nadal wins, whatever. What's Djokovic this year is, well, he won 54% of his points. Like, where's that 4%? And I think that 4% is at 30, 40, deuce, like all those times. And I think that the rallies become much longer. And you see it in junior tennis too. Like,
Yeah.
it gets close, and then the rallies, the length of the rally like extends massively.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yes, it's important to work on the 1-2 punch, but I think that, I mean, in the men's game, their serve is so good. It's not even, I think that they're so good at hitting a winner. It's that their serve is so good that the point is going to finish quickly. So I still believe that a player should be able to build a constructive point. This is my own personal belief, and I think that I'm looking at what most coaches will say, what you hear online, the rally should end in 2, 3 shots. I really look at it like the most important points of a match. I really don't believe are 3 or 4 shots. I believe they're 6, 7, 8 shots, and at least that's from
Yeah.
what I've seen. So I would challenge players to think about that. Yes, do you need to learn how to put away an easy ball? Yeah, but I mean, that's like saying we should practice our overheads more because we don't do that enough. But how much time should we spend on our overheads? Like, that would be, I don't know if, hopefully that answers the question. And
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me. It's I always remember the thing that Guillaume Marc said, like a former coach of Felix, um, that he said, yes, we don't really have long rallies, but psychologically, you would always have those one biggest longest rally in the match that could potentially like switch complete like the whole momentum of the match, and to me personally, like that's what I took away, and to me that's the rally my players need to be ready for, like that one really long rally that potentially can turn the match around.
That's a
And to me
great
that's
point.
just like to me that was like very, when he said that I was like, oh wow, that's interesting, and that stuck with me because yes, you have to practice. It's just like, again, it comes down to what you said. Like you have to practice everything, right? You have to practice your overheads. You have to practice your drop shots. You have to practice everything. That's because you're gonna encounter everything in a match. So, yeah,
Yeah, that's I love
Chris,
that.
is there anything that? Yeah,
I'd
sorry. Go
love to
ahead.
add to that. I love because I think what you said is true. I think we all have this as players. I think any player listening can understand this. Like you know very quickly who can hit more balls in the court. And whether that's because they actually did, they won that long rally, or you can just feel it. Like you just know that that guy or girl can put more balls than you can. How is that developed? Like that's like an unwritten thing, and that's developed by
Yeah,
grinding every day in practice and being able to hit 50 balls. And even though the rally might be four, two, three, four shots, like you said, like I know if I play a guy that's steadier than me, maybe the rally's only ever been four shots, but I know if it went to 10, he'd beat me because he's
yeah,
steadier. And like you said, like that, whether it's winning that long rally or knowing that you
yeah,
can, I think it allows the
yeah,
player to be smarter. And then they don't have to go. I think a lot of players go for the line too much because they don't believe they can win the long rally because something in them says like this
yeah.
guy or girl is better than me, like they're going to out rally me. So I think kind
That's a
of it,
very
what you said or Guillaume Mark said makes a lot of sense.
that's a very good point. That's a really good point, Chris. Chris, just to finish our interview, like I personally had a blast. Like it was a lot of good value, for parents, for coaches, for players. Hopefully, is there something that you want to say to, like, younger players, like your U15, U16, like players that are listening to this podcast?
Yes, it's and I didn't even say it. We had Milos come in actually to talk to our high performance kids, and I think it was he said it kind of the one of the coolest things I've heard in a long time. So I'll have a kid listening to this, and this is for I'll ask the kids the question who are listening. Said, what's your goal? And then, if your goal is to get, I would imagine the goal is to have the best scholarship that you can get. You want to have the best scholarship in your group, or you want to play pro tennis. That's generally, at least who I'm working with. It's they either want to get a scholarship or they want to play pro tennis. Now, and so, Milo should ask this question. And I think people listening will see where this is coming from. But at the time, none of the kids, they were like blindsided. It was the funniest thing I've ever seen. And then we had a group of 20 kids or so. And then he asked, he's like, who's the hardest worker here? And no one raised their hand. And they would ask, oh, who is it? Oh, it's Jim. Oh, it's John. It's Sarah. And the kids would kind of pick who they believed. And funny enough, it's exactly who I thought it was. And all the kids knew who the hardest worker was. And we all kind of laughed about it. And the kids who were picked were like a little, shy. And then Milos kind of gave them a smack over the head metaphorically and said, you know, why isn't it you? Like you just told me you want to play at Wimbledon, but you said that Sarah is the hardest worker here. So like, what are you doing? Like, how do you not believe that you're the hardest? And I thought that was
Yeah, that's powerful.
such a great lesson. So I think for players, it's like if you don't believe you're the hardest worker, then you want to be the best player, you should do that. If you look around your group and you look at, you know, Jennifer and you're like, wow, I can't believe how hard she works, then you're obviously not doing enough. And I think that's something that I think every player should think about. Are they the hardest working player? Or do they believe it? They don't have to be it. Do they believe it? Um, and most of the time, our
Yeah,
beliefs usually will line up with reality if we're mature enough and the coach helps us along.
yeah, 100%. Just because you mentioned so many good things there. Just before we end, I just want to dive into last part. Um, I think the reason why kids, like, because you ask all the kids in all high performance programs across Canada, across the world, they want to be like pro. They want to be pro. But I don't think kids really well, for sure kids do not understand, and it's our job to help what it takes to be the best in the
Yeah.
province? What does it, how much effort, how much passion, how much, work you have to put in to become the best just in your city, in your province? How much effort to be the best in the country? How much effort to be the best in Europe, in the world, ITF junior, and so on and so forth. So I think a lot of kids are just, or they either have that idea from their parents because their parents want, or they just say, they just dream, which is great. I think kids have to dream and they have to have that, like imagination that will take them places, because that's a huge driving force. But then we parents have to help them to really, guide how to get to that dream. Or instead of a dream, it becomes a goal, and then how do we get there? We break it down, and so on and so forth. So that was really powerful what Milos said, by the way. That's really cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that's yeah, they have to, they don't know. You don't know what you don't know, right? And I think
That's right.
it's our job to teach them, like you said. So, hopefully they and they'll see it. I mean, you look at the best player in your group, and most 9 times out of 10 they're the hardest worker, usually.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you're looking, it's not hard to see, I think. But I think most of them
100%.
aren't looking. But yeah,
100%. Chris, thanks a lot for joining. It's been a blast. Like I said, like a ton of value, and we should do this again sometime.
yeah, for sure. That was a lot of fun.
Awesome.